Some kids carry around a teddy bear, some kids carry a blanket. Willie carried around this stool because he knew this stool had the power to let him get places he otherwise couldn't get to. But the stool is given up to Ghost and it's kind of a cheapo, not worth fixing, so we're going to build him something a little bit better.
Making a little step stool, and it was supposed to be for Willie. But if I'm going to make a step stool, I might as well make a decent one. It's pretty handy in the kitchen. Lauren's not the tallest person in the world, that's Willie's mom. So played with some dimensions, and this is what I come up with. Let's see. This would be the sides, and then I have a step here and a step here. And since the base, front and back, sticks out further than the step, it pretty much can't get tumped over by a little one. And then if I make the sides lean out a little bit, it won't be able to get tumped side to side. So I'm going to use some fancy joinery here through mortise and tenon here, and one going sideways, which would be kind of tricky. I'm going to cut out the template and use it to mark the boards, the permanent boards. Okay, I got both pieces marked out. Let's go cut it out.
I'm going to use some of my Sycamore for this project. I had a board that was wide enough for the base so I can get the base out of one piece without having to do a glue up. It's cupped badly and it's pretty twisted, but each little side frame is small enough that we can deal with that.
So to make sure it's stable sideways, I'm going to lean the sides in. And I just kind of said, well, that looks pretty good. So I marked this on the table, and I got the speed square, and it's pretty close to 5 degrees. So I'm going to lean the two sides in 5 degrees. That's an easy number to remember. And all my building lines are going to be referenced off this bottom, and this is not straight because I cut it with the skill saw. So I'm going to set my joiner to 5 degrees and see if I can't joint this bottom straight. I've never done end grain before, but if I move the guard to part of the blades that don't get used much, maybe they're sharp enough where it'll work.
So actually my joiner was making a real light pass, had no problem cutting the end grain. So I was able to get both bottoms straight and accurate, and from now on out we'll measure from those cuts. And here I'm working on trying to get the lump out of one side. Used the hand plane for a while and eventually gave up and pulled out the power plane and got it pretty flat. So with the bottoms clamped so they line up, I got the hand plane and I matched up the two vertical sides. So now we have a bottom and the two verticals are all matching up, all identical.
Okay, so using the bottom as a reference, because the bottom is accurate, I laid out where I have to cut for the step, and these are the two tenons. So I need to cut around and leave the tenon and cut around here and cut around here. But this cut needs to be at a 5 degree angle, so it's kind of complicated. I got them marked, they're both the same. We're going to cut them on the bandsaw, and I'll probably have to clean up a little bit with the chisel. Be hard to get it exactly right.
So the cuts on both sides of the tenons are plumb. So the table on the bandsaw is not been messed with yet. And after I make the cuts right on the side of the tenons, I go back and try to remove a little bit so I can turn the blade after I tilt the table to get to 5 degrees. So cutting both sides as accurately as possible, and then eating out a little room, a divot room at the bottom, so I can get in there with the blade tilted and make that hard turn. Now the table is set at 5 degrees and I'm trying to get in there and turn the blade without breaking it to get the bottom cut where the step's going to sit. It's not too bad on this long area and the other long area, but the little bitty area I really wasn't able to do anything with it. I'm going to have to do that with a chisel.
So between the bandsaw and the chisel, I got the waste removed. These are the two tenons. But right now they're sloping up at 5 degrees and I need them to slope vertical. So I put a little mark right here. It should be vertical. I have to tear it down to that line and this line, and then I'll have to make a parallel line on the other side so that I can put the steps straight on, because I won't be able to put the steps like this. Well, I could if it was just one, but there's two and they won't go on at the same time, so I need to straighten these up.
So now the inside face of the tenon has been sloped to 5 degrees, and now I'm just making a parallel line on the outside face of the tenon, and I'll have to cut it to match, so it'll be parallel on both sides and sloped at a 5 degrees. So I've got the tenons on the first side sloped in at a 5 degrees, and the tenons on the second side, the inside surface is done, but the outside surface hadn't been done yet. And it's time to go find some material for the steps to see if I need to glue something up. I'm not sure.
So I've cut a couple of boards for the steps, and so I need to chop the mortises for the top one, and then the bottom one I'm going to have to mark here and here. It's going to have to slide back a couple of inches and then go down. Is that even possible? It may not be possible. But anyway, first things first, I'm going to chop the mortises for the top and get it locked into place. And right now, with it just sitting there, that leg wants to lean more than this one, so I'm probably going to put a little brace across the back with a dovetail or something cutesy. And I'll probably do that before I cut the bottom step to get it all straightened out.
I'm removing the bulk of the mortise with my little mortising machine. Makes it a lot easier. It cuts a nice square corner.
I'll cut this little brace for the back to keep the legs from at the same angle. They want it to bend different directions. But I've checked it 3 or 4 times and I marked it in place. I got a little dovetail here to make it look kind of pretty. So I just need to cut the notch for the dovetail, and hopefully it'll keep everything nice and straight and strong. We got the bottom step marked for the mortise holes. I marked it, scribed it on the bottom, and then I brought the holes around the top because when you poke through it kind of tears the wood. So I wanted the clean lines up top. So if they match up, it'd be pretty amazing. Okay, well, the seat is assembled. I'm going to trim these tenons off, just have them stick up that much. I'm going to add some lightness by cutting a semicircle out of here, and I'm going to cut a handhold out of both steps, and then I'm going to take it apart and sand it real well, and then we'll put it back together. It's very strong. Oh, wait. I cut this curve out the bottom of the sides just to add some lightness and to just to make it look better. And now I'm a little concerned about the grain of the wood right through here. The grain is this ways, and there's not much wood there, and I'm kind of worried about it splitting open. The same with the other side. You know, very similar. I got short grain and a bad spot. It shouldn't be there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this slot cutter, which will cut a 1/4 by a 1/2 inch deep slot, and I'm going to slot it right through here, and I'm going to fill that with fiberglass and epoxy to give it some tensile strength. A little different in woodworking, but this is kind of like a marine deal. So I'm going to slot it, I'm going to fill it with epoxy and some glass fibers to give it some strength that the wood does not have, because the grain's going the wrong way right there. Or the grain's not going the wrong way. I'm asking
for the grain to be strong in a direction that it's not strong. So this was a little messy, but basically I just poured epoxy into the slot, and then I added chopped fiberglass fibers and juged them down in there best I could, spread them out, and then put more epoxy and then more fibers and more epoxy and more fibers until the holes were filled up to the top. And I'm pretty confident that added a lot of strength to the otherwise potentially weak spot. So all the parts are sanded, all the edges, the exposed edges are rounded over. It's all been together once. It should be relatively straightforward. In this case it was. Time to put it together for the last time. With plenty of yellow glue on the tenons. I didn't put any on the bottom of the step. Beat the step down. It's kind of a tight fit, and when the step was down all the way, I had cut ahead of time a whole bunch of wedges, and the wedges are all wider than I need because the width varies a little bit on these things. So I cut them all extra wide, cut a whole bunch of wedges. I think I cut them out of this Sycamore, but it might have been pecan, I can't remember. And then I took the wedges and cut them to the right width, just with a chisel and a hammer, and coated them with glue, and I hammered them down into the little crisscrosses. So you get one wedge that's full width and two wedges that you have to cut kind of narrow in order to get them in place. But they did end up pushing that out and making them a tight fit in the mortise, and they look pretty good, pretty easy stuff to do. This is where earlier I was scratching my head on trying to figure out how to slide the step into place, and with the sides sloping in, it just wasn't going to work with the step full width. So I ended up ripping the back part of the step off. I kept it so the grain would match up, and now I'm sliding it into place and gluing and clamping it. So you won't be able to see the joint, and 99.9% of the people won't see the problem with how it was assembled. But I just had to cut it off and put it on after the fact. There was no way else that I could figure out how to do it. So with the plug cutter on the drill press, you can cut some matching, or I cut some matching plugs. Could have cut contrasting plugs, but this was on the back, kind of in a funny spot, so I just made matching plugs and put some glue on them. Try to line the grain up as best you can, and when the glue's halfway dry, or actually you can almost immediately hit it with the belt sander, knock them down flat, and the dust from the belt sander will fill up any cracks you might have, and they look pretty cool. So this Sycamore has a really interesting speckled grain to it, at least some of the boards do, and I've played with different finishes over the years, and the best thing to preserve that look to me is just lacquer, spray can lacquer, and it's super easy. So you can put a coat, and 5 minutes later you can put another coat. I ended up putting maybe 4 coats on this thing, and then it was done. And this is the stool. I think this was 2 coats in. I don't really remember. This was not the finish. It's real aromatic. There's a lot of solvents in the lacquer, so you got to put a lot of coats if you want some sort of protection. So a couple more coats to go, and time for delivery. And unfortunately, upon delivery, it's a little heavy for Willie yet. So he relies on his bossing his sister around to get it put where he wants it, or dragging it. But he grows every day, so this won't take long. In the meantime, Colin has figured out how to use it to his advantage.
Buddy, do me a favor. Go get me that beer. No. You bring me that beer. Thanks, bud.